Hey everybody, I'm Adam, and this is Think Club. So I'm going to talk a bit about objective morality, and I want to start off with a clip here from the Sam Harris-Jordan Peterson debate on June 24th, where they are in Vancouver. This is the second debate, and Jordan Peterson summarizes Sam Harris's view on morality and moral systems and what Sam Harris is trying to do with his moral philosophy.
The next part of Sam's argument is that we require a value system that allows us to escape these twin dangers. One stultifies us and the other leaves us hopeless, let's say. And that value system has to be grounded in something real. And the only thing that he can see that actually constitutes real in any provable sense, and there's a certain amount of historical and conceptual weight behind this claim, is the domain of empirical facts as they've been manifested in the sciences and technologies that have made us incredibly powerful and increasingly able to flourish in the world. And so we need to ground our value propositions in something that we've been able to determine has genuine solidity so that we can orient ourselves properly, so that we can make moral claims and that we can avoid these twin dangers. We can begin with some basic facts that we can identify, as I mentioned briefly, what constitutes a bad life: endless pain, suffering, anxiety, tremendous amount of negative emotion, short-term lifespan, all the things that no one would choose voluntarily for themselves if we would all agree that they were thinking in a healthy manner. And we can contrast that sort of domain of horror with the good life, which might involve, well, certainly freedom from privation and want and undue threat and anxiety and hope for the future and all of that. And that we can agree that those are poles, good, bad, and good, and that that's a factual claim. So Sam also claims that we can define the good life, this is an extension of it, with reference to flourishing and well-being, and that can actually be measured, and that we should and can inform the idea of flourishing and well-being with empirical data.
So I'm curious people's interest in this debate over objective morality. I understand that there is a debate between believers and non-believers over objective morality. Some people call themselves moral realists, which I understand as believing there are objective moral facts that we can say that a certain proposition is objectively right or wrong, morally right or wrong, based on some objective measure. I'm not exactly sure what that objective measure is in the scientific sense, because objective measures tend to be things that we can measure, obviously, distance, volume, height. So I'm not exactly sure how you measure something like murder is wrong. I have the definition of morality just from the Merriam-Webster's dictionary here, and I'm focused on this second definition, a doctrine or system of moral conduct, because I think that is the way that if you are going to try to measure morality objectively, that is the cleanest path to be able to do it scientifically. And scientifically is just saying that there is a framework, a measurement that we can all agree upon the outcome of that measurement. So as many of you already know, Sam Harris is a moral realist. He wrote a book called The Moral Landscape, where he argues that science can give us objective moral facts. And I'm going to play a clip here from his recent podcast, relatively recent podcast, with Sean Carroll, who is another philosopher, where Sam Harris lays out his understanding of moral realism and moral facts.
There is consciousness. There's the totality of actual and possible conscious minds that are open to this range of conscious experience. And the only thing I think I need to be a moral realist, and for science ultimately to be the framework in which we talk about right and wrong and good and evil, is to concede that the worst possible misery for everyone is bad. Right? If we should avoid anything, if we should do anything, we should get away from the worst possible misery for everyone. Every other state of the universe is better than that. If words like good and bad and better and worse are going to mean anything ever, having every possible conscious mind suffer as much as it possibly can for as long as it can to no good end, there's no silver lining, there's no lessons learned, this is just hell, right? That's bad and worth avoiding. And the answers as to how the minds involved would avoid this state are all ultimately scientific. In our case, we're talking about everything from genes on up to economic systems. We're talking about neurochemistry, we're talking about psychology, sociology, politics, whatever fact-based discussion we can have about how creatures like ourselves can flourish. That, and again, you and I may define science slightly differently. I'm not talking about narrowly operationalized lab-coded science, or I'm not talking about the equations we can write now to describe these systems. I'm not talking about data we necessarily can get right now with the machines available, but a fact-based discussion about all of the variables that spell the difference between excruciating and pointless misery on the one hand and sublimely creative, beautiful, joyful, as good as it gets conscious states on the other. And again, we don't know how far the horizons go in both directions, and this is why this is realism. Undoubtedly, there are horizons of conscious experience that we will never even imagine exist, but are possible for minds very different from our own.
So Sam Harris lays out here what I would very much describe as a moral system. He's describing a set of ideas that will move us away from what he describes as the moral low point, the greatest amount of suffering for all of the conscious entities in the known universe, in Sam Harris's known universe. So he has basically said that this point is the point that we want to move away from, and that we can measure how far we are from that point scientifically through scientific metrics. And I don't fully disagree with this. If you just want to give him the benefit of the doubt and say, listen, I understand that you are selecting the value that we are going to move to, but I'm willing to give you that. This seems like a good value that everyone would be on board with. Nobody wants to see the most amount of suffering for the most amount of people. Granted, there are people that would want to see that. And that's one of the problems that people have with objective morality, is that people value different things. And this comes into play with Hume's is-ought distinction, where we really have to separate values from what is going on in the actual world. We can agree upon what is, but we can't necessarily agree upon a future that we all want to embark in. Carroll actually makes the point of the is-ought distinction earlier in the conversation between Sam Harris and himself.
In order to derive conclusions about what ought to be true or what should be true or what is morally right, we have to include in our theory an assumption or an axiom that relates to values, that relates to what is good and what ought to do. I think that is a straightforward computational science claim, that you can't do the logic from there. Now, even if you believe that claim, which everyone should believe, you could still argue about moral realism versus anti-realism. It's totally possible to be a moral realist and a moral objectivist and still admit that you can't derive ought from it.
So here, Carroll just seems to be saying that you still can't cross this divide of facts and values, where the scientific realm is concerned with factual reality and the moral realm is concerned with values, what we ought to strive for, behaviors that we ought to avoid, behaviors that we ought to embrace. And because we are creating in our moral system, we are creating a social environment, people might not be on the same page about what that social environment should be. One of the big divides between liberals and conservatives is that the liberals want a certain kind of moral environment and the conservatives want a different kind of moral environment. And I think they are both striving for what they believe would be the most satisfying environment for the most people. But what they don't seem to realize is that what satisfies people is different. Different people are satisfied by different social environments. Jonathan Haidt actually tried to explain this liberal conservative, progressive conservative divide as far back as 2008 at the Beyond Belief conference, where he confronted Sam Harris about this difference in moral values, moral goals, moral systems.
Again, I mean, once you agree that morality relates to the well-being of conscious creatures like ourselves, then all the hard work is still ahead of you. I mean, that doesn't answer the question, what is eudaimonia ultimately? And if we can actually manipulate our own nervous system 100 years from now, if we can actually dial in different states of the nervous system and even dial in different moral intuitions, then the question really opens up. I mean, what is actually optimal? What will flourishing consist of if we ever arrive in such a place like that? But it's I think the ground truth we have to get to is it is about consequences in conscious experience, and it's not about superstition-based abstractions.
Yeah. Could I come in on that? Could I add something? Sam, I think that there's sort of two different kinds of claims you're making. The claim that there is amoral truth, and eventually we could find it with science, is one that I think many people would find difficult to go along with. At the other extreme, your claim that sometimes we can say something, sometimes we can say that something is better or worse than something else, I think is absolutely right, and I'm certainly with you on that. So when you point to a failed state where there is no trust, no government, no care for children, where people are forced by others who have no concern for them to do things, we can agree that is bad. Power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. When you have the morality police charged with being able to do whatever they want to women with no supervision, that's bad. That's going to lead to terrible outcomes. So if you think that me and Josh Green are relativists who believe that if three people think something is right, that makes it right, or at least that we can't criticize it. Well, no. Very few thinking people would ever endorse such a statement. But if you're going to be a moral monist and say there is a truth, and we can find it, and the way we find it is by counting up well-being, utility, then I think you're in danger of hoisting yourself on that empirical petard, because the happiest people in this country by far are evangelical Christians and Orthodox Jews, people who live in tight, according to Arthur Brooks, when he surveys, when he looks at the large-scale surveys, basically the happiest person is a gun-owning Republican Christian living in a tight community.
Okay,
and
there's a few caveats there. One is how we find out. This is why we don't have a neuroscience. I mean, we don't have a neuroscience of human flourishing, and because we don't, we have questionnaires where people report their level of happiness. You know the biases. I mean, you know, if you give a questionnaire to a fundamentalist Christian, are you hopeful about the future?
Look, Sam,
you know, you get
but look what you're doing here.
Bias.
Look what you're doing here. We have empirical evidence. The empirical evidence is extremely consistent.
Yeah.
What do you do when faced with it? You go straight for, but look at all these exceptions, look at all these problems.
I will grant you.
Scientific spirit means you should at least look at the evidence,
absolutely.
take it at face value.
I have looked at it, and I believe some of it is probably true. In fact, if you put me in Afghanistan, I would be guaranteed to be very unhappy. You know, the lone atheist who won't veil his daughter, right? That's a recipe for disaster. So, yes, if you put me in Afghanistan, I'm sure I'm going to become happier if my daughter wears a burqa and I somehow conform to them. And so you're talking about a study done in the United States based on conformity with a culture where 83% of people believe that Jesus was born of a virgin.
So there is that hurdle with objective morality, that different people are going to be satisfied by different moral environments. And if you think of morality as just a set of rules that a society is going to implement, and they are going to have the most happy people, the least, like, we're definitely going to be hopefully far from Sam Harris's low point where he talks about the most suffering for the most people. I love the way the liberals on this panel immediately jump to disputing whether or not these people are actually happy. The one lady seems just confounded that conservatives could ever be happy. It's pretty hilarious. But that's what happens when you live in your moral bubble. In failed states, I think we do get close to that, the most suffering for the most people, where there is an elite group that is living off of the labor of impoverished people. And those are detestable states to live in. If you want to read the book A Long Way Gone, the memoir of a child soldier, it's based in Sierra Leone during the Civil War. And man, I mean, it gets pretty close to what Sam Harris lays out in the most suffering for the most people. So if we want to give him that, and we want to say we're trying to get away from that horrible outcome, and we need a set of rules that everyone is going to follow, and that set of rules is going to produce a society, and that society we can measure on certain objective measures, then I think we can say that we have an objective morality. But the problem that I have here is when these discussions take place over objective morality, a lot of them are just focused on one moral fact. They want to say that abortion is wrong, or they want to say that the death penalty is wrong and objectively wrong. And they do a lot of what I would describe as just rationalizations on why they have that opinion. But I don't necessarily know how you get an objective measurement. And I constantly press people on this, and I'm curious in the comments below if you better understand this than me, how you're getting that this proposition is objectively correct. I understand that religious people usually use the measure of scripture, but they have a problem that people disagree on that measurement device because they don't believe scripture is actually the word of God. So then, but you also have the atheists, the Sam Harris types, who they have this measurement that has to do with conscious states of being. I'm not sure I even really understand how Sam Harris is going about measuring this. Like, he did a TED Talk on this where he talks about how there are societies with the over-sexualization of women, and then there are societies where they put their women in cloth bags, burqas, and there is some happy medium in between that science should be looking to find. I don't know that science will find that happy medium. It seems like the population of human beings will find that happy medium. So I don't necessarily know how we measure that. But if we have a set of rules that we implement and we focus on the society that is implementing that set of rules, we can measure certain things objectively and scientifically objectively, like the suicide rate. Like, if perhaps you wanted to know how much happiness there was in that society. If that society had a very high suicide rate, I think we could infer objectively that that society was not functioning objectively well. There are other metrics that you can measure, and people do measure these metrics. They measure gross domestic product. They measure income inequality. They measure unemployment. They measure the number of people on public services. They measure food stamps. There are all these objective measures. So it seems like we are objectively measuring our society the best we can, and we are constantly tinkering with those inputs into that society, which are effectively the rules, the moral rules, the moral system. When we make laws and legislation, we are saying that this behavior is wrong, or we want to encourage this behavior. So it seems like we are kind of developing an objective morality when we have a system of laws. So I'm curious your thoughts on this. I listened to these debates on objective morality, and I'm curious if you feel as frustrated by them as me, because it almost seems like a misunderstanding of what objective means. That in order for something to be objective, we have to have an agreed upon measurement of it. And people want to measure morality in all these ways that just, my mind explodes because it doesn't seem possible for it to be objective. So I'm curious your thoughts. I'm curious if you're even interested in this topic. It definitely interests me, but I know it's not a topic that people flock to. There are some people that are very particular about objective morality. They see themselves as moral realists. And actually, one of my favorite YouTubers,